Welcome to the Fuel Pulse Show podcast. I'm your host, Eric Bjornstad. I'm your guide through the ever-changing world of fuel. The Fuel Pulse Show podcast is for anyone who uses fuel, and that's whether at work or at home. And that means it is pretty much for everyone. Especially if you have a job that requires you to take care of fuel or fuel systems, or as we're going to be talking about today, tanks and things that store fuel and distribute fuel for use in other areas. If any of that, if you're responsible for any of that, then I really think you're going to like today's episode. So what are we going to be talking about today on the Fuel Pulse Show podcast? Well, today we are talking to C.J Schultz from Tanknology, who are the world's largest provider of, I almost said producer, but world's largest provider of tank testing and environmental compliance services for petroleum systems. So how big are they, you ask? Well, Tanknology, every year, I believe they test more than 2 million tanks, and they provide compliance services for more than, I think, 85,000 sites around the world. So
Yep, we're touching 85,000 sites
so they have a
year here.
Big reach. Yeah, and CJ is Tanknology's director of sales, and that means that he helps a lot of petroleum handling operators with their compliance management solutions. That's something we're going to talk about today, and he does it all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, as well as really across the nation. So CJ's specialty is regulatory compliance testing, and that's, as I understand it, on the federal, state, and local levels. We'll talk about that too. So should have a lot of good stuff to talk about. Now, on the personal side, CJ graduated from the University of Toledo with a degree in environmental sciences, and he is a NACI AMMP Level 2 certified CP technician. And when he's not solving problems at work, he enjoys playing the guitar, running the occasional 5K, which is a fine combination indeed. So, C.J. Schultz, welcome to the Fuel Pulse Show podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric. I look forward to talking tanks and seeing what we can uncover here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm
for sure
definitely excited about this because I think you have a lot of knowledge in areas that can get really complicated. My knowledge, with Bell Performance, the company that I work with, I'm the technical director. My knowledge is more on the chemistry and the formulation side, but you got a lot of knowledge in things that can get really complex that I would say people have to pay attention on the ground level, and that's regulatory compliance and testing of their systems and everything like that. So I think this is going to be a really good discussion today.
Well, I agree. We definitely see a lot with 85,000 touches a year and certainly growing. We have 22 patents, our own equipment, so we don't license anything within the United States. We do have 26 licensees that service 33 countries around the globe. So we see a little bit of everything, but the heavy lifting is always stateside. And that's why I look forward to walking through, answering some questions, and just giving some oversight on what our overall breadth of services is and what we've seen over the last several decades.
Yeah. Mentioning about the fact that you're helping more than 80,000 entities around the world, 33 different countries. Like you say, you've got patents. You've got a really broad reach. I know Tanknology itself are a really well-known player in the stored fuel sector. You have your hands in a lot of different things. So for people out there, maybe to kick this off, people out there who are not that familiar with all the things that Tanknology does, maybe we can kick things off by having you tell our audience a little more about all the things that you have your hand in the industry.
Well, certainly it all starts with our involvement at all levels of government and the EPA, the states, every one of our offices. You break it, like compartmentalize it. We have our core compliance testing. So we have 8 offices across the country. We're headquartered in Austin, Texas. And really, what we're doing with that is we have regional managers, operations managers, office managers that are responsible for their little corner of the world.
Okay.
We aggregate all that information and bring it into our databases and our account management group so that we can provide the best in class services for our customers. That core testing, like you've mentioned several times, is really the tanks, the lines, the infrastructure that's underground and now even above ground to some level, overseen by the EPA. One of our other divisions, we've started where you were a jack of many trades, like
Mm-hmm.
when I first started in the industry, and you would have like fuel quality, corrosion protection, all the testing requirements. Now what we've done is we've been able to compartmentalize that,
Mm-hmm.
and we know we can provide a better service by focusing one or two individuals to run a specific division.
Mm-hmm.
So while we have all 8 of the regions out there doing their thing with the regional touch, we also have brought together our corrosion protection division. So that's anything steel in the ground that's potentially could leak because of
Yeah.
corrosion. We have NACE engineers, one of which I that's where I started in the industry with
Mm-hmm.
Tanknology, installing these systems. So it's so specialized. We wanted our techs that are doing that. That's all they do. Getting the right readings, reporting it back,
Mm-hmm.
and then providing a first class response and product to our customers. We're definitely the largest corrosion protection company in the world, specifically in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, for underground storage tanks. So that's just one little spot. One other thing that we've brought to the table too is our inspection services. So amongst that 85,000 to 100,000 touching sites every year, we're up to about 6,000 monthly 30-day walkthroughs where we go to retail facilities with regulated underground
Yeah.
storage tanks. So the amount of data that we're seeing is pretty astronomical as to what's going on at these facilities. And there's checklists that we got to fill out to do that. From that, we've kind of segued over into our AST division, where again we've focused. We've got individual technicians that's all they
Mm-hmm.
submit their time to, and it gives us the best product for the industry. And then also for what Eric, is with the fuel quality. Like all of these things have kind of evolved to like, well, you're on the site. Can you sample the fuel? Can you look and see what's going on in our tanks? We're like, well, we can clean your tank or condition the fuel as
Yeah.
well. So we kind of roll into that, and there's a number of different applications for that process. And then wrapping it all together is our compliance management services, where we can be as hands-on or as hands-off as you need us to be in the industry or for your sites. What I mean by that is everybody's got their way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
but there's only one way to do it per the EPA in the States, and that's the right way.
Yes.
So with all that, we package it together and would assign responsibility as needed to make sure that the sites are being tested in the time frames and properly at all levels of government to remain compliant, and we'll put our stamp on it if you're a partner with us.
Yeah, yeah, and a couple of things stand out on what you were talking about. The first thing is what you just said recently about there's only one way to do things, and that is the right way. And what that brings to
Correct.
mind is that let's say on the fuel filtration, we'll say fuel servicing side,
Mm-hmm.
where you're doing something inside the tank, you've got a problem, and there are any
Yep.
number of people out there. Sometimes in the industries, some people call them like the ham and eggers, the people who they're not exactly rigorous with their processes. They'll tell the
Got
customers
it.
what they want to hear. They'll do shoddy workmanship, if you want to call it that. They'll do the absolute minimum that not that it takes to solve the problem, but to convince the customer or fool the customer into thinking they've done something meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's versus, what we would call the best practice way, which is maybe more involved. And yet, the average person, the average tank professional, if you will, operations manager, may not necessarily know the difference. So, it's really important to, if you have a problem, it's for me, it would be reassuring if I start talking to someone at Tanknology about what you guys do, and to hear that you have your hands in so many things, but you're also really concerned about making
Right.
sure that things are done the right way, because not everyone will do that, basically.
Well, it's also the way you present it to the customer. I'm like, over the years, you take your lickings, and you want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously want to make your company money, but like I said, the right way is the only way.
Mm-hmm.
And explaining that, I'll go back to what you were mentioning about like the fuel
Yep.
quality. Like when I first started, I'm like, oh, you need your tank clean, so we have a fuel pure process. We just go in
Mm-hmm.
there with a wand, work it, it's clean. Well, is it? I'm like, it's as good as what you apply
Yeah.
above. You can't see the tank, the interior. So, Tanknology over the years, we've developed our tank cam,
Mm-hmm.
so we can actually put a camera down into this tank and power wash it and directionally spray and show you it's the one and done. So I tell all the sales folks and operations, like, it's important. Like, when you're talking cleaning tanks, people only hear what they want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I got a clean tank, and then in a month or after 3 fuel drops, the problem manifests itself
Yep.
again. You're right back, and you got an upset customer. So understanding the levels of commitment by the client, as well as what we're able to provide as a service, is key to making sure that you have a lasting partnership,
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
yeah, definitely. I'm glad you bring up the tank cam technology that you
Yeah.
have, because yeah, definitely when you're talking about cleaning tanks, it's really hard to actually know if a tank is fully clean, if you want to put it that way, without actually being able to see inside of it. And very, very few people are gonna be, are really equipped to be able to do like man entry, which would really be the only way
Right.
to really know for sure. But that's not realistic for the vast majority of people. The Having a camera inside the tank, like you're talking about, um, at least enables you to be able to see, get a lot better, visual view, versus kind of guessing by doing it from the outside and then assuming that you've gotten everything when you most likely haven't.
No, definitely. And and articulating that to the customer is just understanding the difference in cost
Yes.
too. Everything's about the bottom line. What can I get away with
Mm-hmm.
that I can be in compliance, but not lose the bank
Mm-hmm.
type approach. And when it comes to the tank cam, that whole idea, we had a petroscope that was third party certified that we would utilize to evaluate linings of steel
Mm-hmm.
tanks back in the late 90s. And that was part of the upgrade process. It had to pass the lining inspection by an engineer with our camera before they could put cathodic protection
Mm-hmm.
on it. A lot of them didn't pass it, or they needed to be cleaned. So that was our camera. Go forward 5, 10 years, we're cleaning this site on the East Coast. And like I had just mentioned earlier, this is where we learned the
Mm-hmm.
lesson. We were going back there every month because the customer was like, you're not getting it right. And what we found is we put the petroscope in
Yeah.
there, and you could see the trough where we broke through all of the
Yep.
sludge, but it was so bad that they had to put someone in there in order to shovel it out. But you wouldn't know that without the camera. So now it's totally evolved to where that's just one of the things like we're able to offer to anybody, a single site operator or somebody with thousands. If you want to look at your tanks, evaluate their condition for upgrades, see what's going on at all the tanks you installed in 1985, whatever the case may be, and then we can grade them and see what we're doing.
Now, how big was this tank, if you recall, from this customer?
It was a smaller. It was like from what I recall, is like a 2,000
Mm-hmm.
gallon diesel. So, I mean, diesel typically has a little bit more fun going on
Oh
inside the
yeah.
bottom of the
Yep,
tanks.
yep, yep.
But,
Yeah, I think people
but
don't
yeah,
realize, yeah, as you put it, how much fun is going on in all of these thousands upon thousands, millions, if you will, tanks across the
oh yeah,
country.
oh yeah,
One of the things that we talk about, the microbial problems that are developing. I think
yep,
that we're only scratching the surface of the problems that people are going to start seeing. And that means they're going to have to do something about those. I mean, you mentioned with this customer, you said that you kept having to be called back because they said you hadn't solved the problem. So how did they
right.
uh what were they looking at to determine if you had solved the problem, or what was happening in that tank that made them have to call you back?
Filters, it's all filters
Okay.
clogging and just the ability to move that product out of the
Mm-hmm.
tank. So, I mean, and then we'd go out there, do a sample, and that's the thing. When people come out
Mm-hmm.
there, and you were talking about what's the level of service, you're trying to prove that you did something. I've seen it. People go out there, they put one end in to remove the fuel and
Mm-hmm.
filter it, put the hose in the other, flip the switch, and don't do a thing. I'm like, you're never touching the wall of that tank. You might agitate it a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, but if you're doing it right, you're focusing, looking at the low end of the tank, getting all the apparatuses removed, doing water samples, sticking the tank,
Mm-hmm.
looking for all those things. So that's, I mean, we felt that we needed to develop something so that we could just put it to bed,
Yeah.
honestly. And you know, nothing against the customer. It's just something that we knew we could progress towards, and that's kind of how the evolution of the tank cam started. And then it's got legs of its own going into the, looking at the fiberglass, the whole
Mm-hmm.
9 yards. So
Well, and you
one thing leads to several others.
yeah, and you talk about sampling. Um,
Hmm.
in talking about the typical way people service these tanks, and typically how people view things like with respect like microbial problems. Um,
Yep.
the one of the things we try to emphasize to people that we talk to is that, especially when it comes to fuel testing and trying to diagnose microbial problems, presence of water, things like that, your conclusions are only good as the sample that you can have. And there are right ways to
True.
pull samples, but a lot of people don't even know the basics of doing that. And so they rely on somebody who may not know the basics themselves, but they say they do. And they go in and they pull a sample that seems to indicate there's a problem. Maybe they just do a visual, which visuals are useful, but they have their limitations.
Yes.
And then they do whatever service they think they're going to do. They don't get everything, and they pull a sample that looks clean because they happen to pull it from the top of the fuel sample,
Right.
where it's always going to be clean anyway. And they say, hey, we've solved the problem. um,
True.
that I think this idea that there's a more rigorous way you have to approach these things, or else you'll just have to keep pouring money into them. I think that's something that is hard for people to hear, but yet it's an inescapable truth, I think.
And that's where, like for Tanknology, with all the touches that we go to our customers, we're able to bundle these types of services in. So to your point, Eric, about the fuel sampling, yeah, you can get a crystal clear fuel
Mm-hmm.
sample pretty much on 80%, 90% of any tank
Absolutely.
if you don't go deep
Yep.
enough. So, what we'll do is we've developed a diesel check when we're out at our
Mm-hmm.
customers. We do it for regular gasoline just as well. When we're doing the testing, the core compliance testing that the states
Mm-hmm.
regulate in the EPA, it requires us to do a functionality test of, their automatic tank gauging
Yep.
system. So what that leads us into is, to your point, where's the fuel going when they're getting a delivery? Right in the fill. So what's happening is you've got all of this gallonage going in there, just flushing everything
Mm-hmm.
out from the bottom of where that striker plate is, even up above the fiberglass tank. And you might not get if it's not the low end of the tank, which it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You might not see anything. So we'll usually take samples from the fill, and then go to the automatic tank gauge because that area is typically only touched once or twice a year. And it's usually, halfway down the tank or possibly even on the other end to where, you get a good cross section at the bottom to see what you're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah. And just hearing somebody like yourself mention all of these things, I think that people who are listening to this should get the idea that there's a vast difference between the amount of knowledge and the amount of attention to relevant detail that a company like Tanknology offers versus the fly by night person who makes claims that they can't back up for I won't say half the cost because it may even be less than that. But one of the things that we find in dealing with out in the business world with larger companies and especially government entities that have purchasing agents, and they put, let's say they put service jobs out for bid, the purchasing person, there may be a vast disconnect between them and the operations manager. The operations manager has a very clear view on what the problems are, but the purchasing person, all they care about is the bottom line
True.
numbers. And we run into it when we try to do things. We've run into it actually quite a lot recently, where there'll be people who will bid on a fuel treatment and tank servicing project, if you will, and the entity will say, "Okay, we need to control water. We need to make sure that microbes aren't a problem, and we need to
Yeah.
stabilize the fuel." So if you were thinking, well, what do I need to do this in terms on the chemical side, you definitely need a fuel stabilizer. You need something that's got a biocidal component to it, and something that controls water. And somebody else comes along and says, well, I'll just put a biocide into it. Biocides, by definition, are single function things that they kill microbes, but they don't stabilize the fuel. And they
Right.
quote 1 cent per gallon or whatever the cost is, and that purchasing person's like, oh yeah, they win. um, but they don't realize that that person is not fully addressing all the problems. They just see the numbers, and then the problems persist and
We,
they're back to
we
square one.
And we see the same with the compliance. I mean, procurement, I mean, that's their
Mm-hmm.
function, and we get it. We do the same things, looking for the best value for the cost. And, I guess the feather in Tanknology's cap that we always pitch, and I do with my customers, is, we're testing tens of thousands of locations, managing, 16,000 that we
Mm-hmm.
have complete responsibility over the fines, everything. If something happens at these
It's a
locations,
good point.
we can put that right on to the person that has 1 to 15
Mm-hmm.
sites. And if you're looking at 50 to 150 sites and procurement starts going regionally, I'm like, understand that we're going to give you the regional feel, but we've got all these samples to pull from as best practices, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, and to bring that horsepower to you. So if the price is a little bit more, but right in line with local competitors, think of the back infrastructure. Like our database of tank information is probably the biggest database of testing. It is of testing results ever anywhere. So and you have 100% access to that as a in good standing customer to utilize that data and to have us on your side through that account management piece to help drive the car to make sure that it's in its lane. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So you mentioned this database that you have. So what you're saying is, and I have a couple of things in mind as I'm formulating this question. Um,
Gotcha.
the the customers have access to this data now. Um, what would be the best use for them? What would be the big value proposition for them? What would they use it
so
for?
so do you so really at your fingertips to be able to go in, have your own personalized access to your team
Mm-hmm.
based on state, region, however you want to parcel it out. But to be able to go in there and get the actual testing
Mm-hmm.
results and any information going back to the history of the system or your interaction with us. Now, the next step, that's the hands-off approach, allowing the customer, you can drive your own car. You can tell us what you want to
Yep.
do, when you need it done, and we can go with that. Or you can start letting loose a little bit, and then we have all the sites. We'll typically scope them, have regular interactions with the head of environmental at a
Yeah.
specific company, and then they're telling us like what they need. We're telling them what we've seen from the field in other areas as new regulations come up. Some of that big picture planning to help procurement, like looking, hey, we got new
Mm-hmm.
regulations coming. Everything needs to be tested by October 13th of 2018. Don't be that customer that calls on October
Yeah.
1st. So like our partners, we're doing it if it's a 3-year frequency and a new test needed for their systems. We started in 2015, like when it first started coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's and and we're usually on the forefront of understanding the regulations and getting those types of data points to our customers so that they can make informed decisions.
Well, and
Quick.
everything that you bring up there, I think people would be surprised at just how I think how rare it is to have that kind of information all in one place. I mean, I'm the kind of person I tend to assume that people know a lot more than they what they may actually do know, and
Right.
there are a number of times when I have talked to fairly large companies uh, about some of these projects. I tend to do like more like microbial testing, things like that.
Yep.
And anytime you're talking about microbial testing and remediation, there are a chemical biocide treatment that goes along with it, and tank cleaning, things like that. And there are a number of times when I've been really surprised when these companies who are large companies, even like Fortune 500 companies, and they're like, yeah, we don't keep track of that information. We don't know what's been done to, this tank out here in Galveston, Texas. We don't know its
Right.
history. Nobody ever recorded when stabilizer was put in it or biocide, what's been done. I always assumed that, if they're a large company, they got that way in part by keeping track of this kind of stuff. But
Right.
so I'm often surprised at how few people actually have access to that kind of information. So the fact that you guys offer, the ability to keep track of that, I think is a really useful thing for people.
And I think the other add on there is, there's asset, gathering
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, we call it critical
Yep.
data within our system. What kind of tank is it? What kind of line? And that's kind of the process when you're engaging with a new customer and or existing one. What do we need to do? What do you need to do to stay in compliance? The first thing is figure out what's in the
Mm-hmm.
ground or above ground and then apply it to your area. Um, that's really the gist of compliance. And when our matrix is
Yep.
comprised of all 8 offices coming together through our account management system and then putting it in the tanks. So we can go out there if a customer is, here's another thing, Eric, like you don't know with acquisitions. I'm like, who knows what you're really getting? There should be
Yep.
databases, and the data is only as good as it's changed hands 5 times. So what we tend to offer is like, hey, through an acquisition, we know the real estate folks just want to get the deal
Mm-hmm.
through. I'm like, however, what are they going to dump on the environmental person's plate as far as dealing with the remediation? Are the tanks?
Yeah.
Do they even have like fills and the right equipment on it? So that's where we come in. We can test, pull from all our resources, test 50 sites in a month and a half, or
Yep.
whatever the client may need with some planning, and give them some due diligence. Be like, here, send this back, and here's what we think. Here's what we found. Oh, and by the way, we put the camera in there. It's not fiberglass, it's steel. Things like that. It happens.
Have you ever found when you put the camera in the tank, um, like you said, you find that, oh, it's not fiberglass, it's steel. So you find something surprising. Have you ever found things that really turn out to be critical problems that they would have no way to know about? Like, for example, delamination of the lining.
Mhm.
Yeah, which.
Yes. Yes. We've seen a little bit of everything, and there's no like, oh, it's this tank or
Hmm.
that tank. It's across the board. Was it installed properly? Was there the right backfill underneath?
Hmm.
It might be deflected or sagging at the top just as much. We've seen it, bent in, you name it. You can see it. You see tools issues underneath
Yeah.
where there might not have been a striker
Mhm.
plate
Mhm.
where,
Yep.
from years of sticking the tank, it ends up going right through it. And then the clay compacts
Uh-huh.
it. You run a test on it, you start having bubbles. We've even incorporated in a few regions. This is like the Cadillac or
Yeah.
Ferrari when we can pull the tank under vacuum with our tank test, and depending on the fuel levels, put the camera in at the same time and create the leak, because these tanks are moving depending on how much fuel's coming in and going out, the groundwater and
Mhm.
everything. So you take all of these different data points and the experiences of the past, and when you put that camera in there, sometimes you don't find it. But a majority of the times, if you're having a water ingress, you're gonna see it.
Mhm.
I mean, it just and that's why we have on our website later, like Tank Trouble
Oh, yeah.
Tuesdays. It's like we're constantly putting that out there to be
Yeah,
like,
tell
hey,
us a little more about that because that's something that I did see. So, yeah, talk about that.
so it's on our website, tanknology.com, right at the top. You can click on it and become a
Mhm.
member. I mean, it's just repetitive things that we're running into as far as utilization of the tank
Yeah.
cam. Chris Bolden, our VP of International and Marketing, has done a great job putting that together on a regular rotation. And that's kind of answers your question, like, what are you seeing? I mean, a little bit of everything. And that kind of gives you a cross view of steel tanks, fiberglass tanks, older fiberglass, newer, everything. We even put the camera, and on that Tank Trouble Tuesday, when they're ballasting tanks
Mhm.
for new
Yep.
builds, new to industry, they'll fill them with water so that they don't pop out of the
Sure.
ground because of high water table. We have several customers that want us to go in afterwards to make sure that the tank's
Yes.
dry, that all the water came out, because that's happened in the past too. It's like, oh yeah, that was handled on Thursday. Come Friday to open, and they got phase separated fuel
Yep. Yep.
because the water wasn't removed.
Or I mean, if they didn't get all the water and it's a diesel tank, then they're probably going to have
Right.
microbes that develop, a lot faster than they would have if it had been dry.
Water is definitely a microbial. There it
Yeah.
is. If you can keep the water out of your tank, or minimize it,
Minimize
like
it.
we tell everybody, like, keep that on the, especially for USTs, it's a little easier to control. You don't see it as easily in ethanol because, until things start phasing
Yeah.
out, you might not get it. So it's, yeah, water. There's a lot of it on this planet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of the drums that we always bang with our customers and the people that we talk to. Water is the big thing because it can lead to well, you can't get away from it because, like you said, there's a
Right.
lot of water, and yeah, it is the conduit, the gateway to so many problems in these kinds of systems. Microbes especially, which is why I think that in the coming years, um, this trend towards greater awareness of microbial issues and all the problems that those contribute to, it's going to be something that's going to have to become more and more top of mind for people, and they're going to have to know how to
No,
test.
there's no
Yeah,
doubt.
and they're going to have to have relationships with professionals, whether it's Tanknology or somebody else, some other company that knows what they're doing and can help shepherd them through this problem, because microbes can cause a lot of problems, and there's only certain things you can do to actually solve the problem versus taking the quick and easy shortcut that doesn't actually solve the problem but make fool the operations manager or the person in charge, fool them into thinking it's been taken care of.
And that's where you get like part of the intent of the operator training is to empower the individuals that are at these
Yep.
locations, these clerks. Their turnover is pretty extensive, but
Yeah.
there is a plan in place, or should be, for each operator to be like, hey, here's what your entity, your employee needs to know. And then we come in there, and to the water point, the biggest thing we see is, or get asked, I'm like, can you handle that water? Can you get rid of that
Mm-hmm.
water? Meaning in the spill buckets,
Mm-hmm.
because first of all, these aging sites, there might be some sagging or the topography
Yep.
changes, and all of a sudden you get, every time it rains, look in Florida, every time it rains, you're probably getting water in your spill
Absolutely.
buckets. And are you going to spend $600, $800 a month to have a vac truck come out there? Maybe. I'm like, but what we do is, we kind of roll it in with our inspection
Mm-hmm.
services to put it in a container or drum
Yeah.
on site, because it does get a little touchy when you don't want to be hauling the liquid
No,
around. So that's where we draw the line.
because there are
Just keep it
regulations
at the
about
facility.
that.
Yes, there,
Yes,
yes,
there
there are,
are.
and we respect DOT.
Yeah. Well, speaking about regulations here, so since you are a professional who's got extensive knowledge on the compliance side in a lot of different areas, and so you get paid to know a lot about something which can be a pretty complex issue. So, um, one thing I wanted to ask was, and some of this may come down to it depends, but um,
Right.
when you're taking a customer, like let's say a retail fueling site or a hospital, two
Yeah.
different kinds. Um, as far as regulatory issues, what would you say are the most important things that they need to know, whether they're high level or specific? What's the most important things that they need to know um, for the regulatory issues on their different kinds of tanks?
So the retail, I mean, they both fall in under the
Mm-hmm.
EPA, that state, and that
So
local
federal,
entity as
state,
well.
local.
If you're dealing Yeah, and if you're working with
Yep.
ASTs, the flow down from EPA going down to the state, but a lot of times that goes right to the fire
Yep.
marshal as well. So that entity, a lot of times, they find wind if something's leaking, and then all bets are
Mm-hmm.
off. They're calling up the chain, and then everybody's coming in. So in that regard, I guess for the retail, I would just say you just need to focus on the core testing
Okay.
requirements. Um, are you doing your best practices? Are you going out there monthly, looking at it, and are you acting upon it? I mean, if you're self-performing these
Yep.
tests, which you can, just make sure that if somebody shows up and you don't have the box checked, that's problem number
Mm-hmm.
one. If you say there's water present, or I don't have my release detection for this specific tank for month A, B, and C,
Mm-hmm.
you need to show like what you did to
Yep.
fix it, or to prove that it's not leaking, like calling in a professional like Tanknology to test your tank. So those are the types of things for the
Yep.
retail that we're grabbing, and then we're pushing it to them as an exception report. There's too much information for anybody to know
Right.
everything. So our goal is to parse it down to the problems, because everybody remembers the problems,
Yeah.
not all the good
Yep. Yep.
stuff. We send that over, and they act on it or they don't. But we want to get you
Yeah.
to you, and if we're responsible, we'll handle it. The hospitals, same thing, but honestly, the focus there has always been in your wheelhouse, the fuel quality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how often is the fuel cycling? Do they need to replace it every year? Are they sampling it quarterly?
Mm-hmm.
And not just a clear and bright. I would argue that on a retail site that's moving a lot of
Yep.
fuel, the clear and bright is fairly good indicator of where you need to go if you're taking it in the right
Yeah.
spot. If you're having an issue, go to the lab analysis. But like anybody else on the retail too, they're selling it to their customers. To have your lab analysis and showing what's going on with the
Mm-hmm.
fuel is it's insurance. You know, because when somebody's 50-year-old truck breaks down on your lot, they're saying, well, it was their fuel, and you say, no, it
Yeah.
wasn't, because I just had this sample. You know, it's that kind of thing. And the hospital for sure. I mean, they're mission critical things such as
Yes.
the data centers, like the Verizons, all that with the phones. Imagine if the phones don't work, or you know, you're going to hear about it pretty quick.
Yeah, you bring up mission
So,
critical. What gets defined as mission critical in 2022 is there are some things that are mission critical now that were not mission critical 20 years ago, and the data centers. Oh, most definitely.
oh,
Yeah.
I mean, the data centers that are out there. I mean, I've been in a few of these, and I mean, I don't think the general public's like, oh, I'm watching cable, and I'm like, you're looking, and when you walk into some of these places, there's just
Mm-hmm.
stacks of this equipment, and if the power
Yep.
goes out, within like 5 minutes, everything's gonna melt because they don't
Yeah.
have their cooled floors and everything. So the fuel component for that backup generator system to make sure that it's operating, functioning, and you're looking at it is mission critical because you don't want the bad to happen because everybody will
Well,
remember it.
and that that is only going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When I think about trends for the future, I think about the fact that the amount of data transmission, if you will, is
Yep.
again only getting bigger, 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 and bigger, especially as we get more things like autonomous vehicles, where they're going to have just like huge, huge amounts of data that's going to be just flowing from everywhere, if you will, and that's going to mean that these sites are going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to become more and more important for them to stay on top of these issues so that those
Yep.
they don't have the outages which will become more damaging to people's lives because people are only going to keep getting more and more connected.
Uh, totally. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what my kids would do if the iPhone and iPad didn't
Yeah.
work. I mean, it's just, yeah, everything's moving faster, and that's one of the things about this industry. And forward looking, it's not going to slow down. It's just like the
No.
universe; it just keeps going faster and faster as it expands. So
Yeah.
here we are. Buckle
Yeah,
up.
and I think that in the coming decades we're going to see a change in the fact that um, petroleum vehicles, for example, they're really trying
Hmm.
to move towards phasing that out and replacing them with electric vehicles. Now, our business at Bell, we've been tied to petroleum fuels for a long time, but we're not necessarily opposed to that because nobody's going to snap their fingers and all the petroleum's
Right?
going to
No.
go away. It's going to be a business transition, but what that's going to be replaced by is a greater and greater reliance on generation and on data transmission, and that's going to require, depending on what level you're at, that's still going to require some kind of fuel to be used at some point, and that's going to be more and more important, which means it's going to be just as critical to take care of those things. It's just going to look different. It's just going to be in a different place, I think.
I agree. Petroleum and petroleum's not going away anytime soon. It can't. Everything, my shirt, I mean the plastic
Yeah.
behind me, I mean it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I don't think there's not too many people out there that don't want to, like I said, we're in this business, environmental science, to save the environment. It's a cost of doing business to live and have the things that we have. But you're right. It's going to move so quickly, I believe. But we don't feel that there's going to be. It's not going to happen
No.
tomorrow. This is decades
No,
process.
no, no, and um, I, from our viewpoint, depending on, I would say, regardless of which side of the political aisle you fall on, I think we have to recognize that, everybody wants a cleaner environment. Everybody wants good things for our society and for the world. They just may disagree on how to get there. So from our
Right.
standpoint, I personally think that electric vehicles and those kinds of things are great, and I think that there's a lot of hubbub right now in the government trying to take steps towards making that happen. But I think when people understand how government has to work versus the private sector, I think eventually they realize that there are certain things that the government has to kind of kickstart in order to make, put the things in place that the private sector can come in and, continue with the development. And so, with respect to like electric vehicles and things like that, I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that in the coming decades, 20 years from now, maybe even 10 years from now, I think that people will look back on the rhetoric going around talking about, oh, we don't have any place to charge these, and what are we going to do if we're broken down the side of the road? I think that people are going to look 20 years down the road and be like, yeah, we solved that problem because we have really smart people who are trying to figure out solutions to this. And so, I, being the naturally optimistic person that I am, I think that they'll get there. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but they will get there. And 20 years from now, I think that people will be like, yeah, electric vehicle, yeah, it's no big deal.
I mean, they've been around since the beginning of time,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just, you know, it'll it'll happen slowly. I mean, we New Jersey, my New Jersey world is way different than my Ohio upbringing where my parents are
Uh-huh.
now. I mean, it's like you're not plugging in no one's riding a Tesla in Amish country over there. I mean, they're really, unless they're sightseeing.
Yeah.
So it's a little different in the flyover areas at times. So,
Well,
but like I said, we're here to make sure that while we get to there at some point down the future, we're minimizing and cleaning up all the releases or
yep.
issues, potential releases, to make it all work in one big happy
Yep.
family.
Yep. And so
Very well.
that about wraps things up for today's episode of the Fuel Pulse Show podcast. Thank you for spending part of your day or night with us. Check the show notes at our website for links to everything that was mentioned in this episode. That's at www.bellperformance.com. Please make sure to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And last but not least, if you like what you heard, feel free to leave us a good rating on those sites as well, because that really helps people find us. So we would appreciate it if you do that as well. So bye-bye, everyone. Catch you next time on the Fuel Pulse Show podcast.